Back. We're reading Martin Heidegger's Metaphysics, a German philosopher. He's pretty wordy, but he's still fascinating nonetheless. So we are in his section called The Question of the Essence of Being. Okay, we're on page 85, and we're starting at the beginning of the page. And how are we to determine that something that is presumed to be at some place in time is not unless we can clearly distinguish in advance between being and not being? How are we to make this decisive distinction unless we know just as decisively and definitively what is meant by what we are distinguishing here? Not being and being. Okay, so we're distinguishing between not being and being, okay? How can beings always and in each case be beings for us unless we already understand being and not being? Well, our understanding of them doesn't stop them being from what they are, right? I'd say. But we are constantly faced with beings. We distinguish between their being thus and being otherwise. Being thus and being otherwise. We judge about being and not being. We therefore know unambiguously what being means. The claim that this word is empty and indefinite would then just be a superficial way of speaking, and an error. Such reflections put us in a supremely ambivalent position. We first determined that the word being tells us nothing definite. We did not just talk ourselves into this. Instead, we found out, and we still find now, that being has an evanescent, indefinite meaning. Okay, so he's telling us, I'll write that. But on the other hand, our latest considerations convince us that we clearly and surely distinguish being from not being. In order to get our bearings here, we must pay attention to the following. Surely it could come in doubt whether at some place in time an individual being is or is not. We can deceive ourselves about whether, for example, the window over there, which is of course a being, is closed or is not. However, merely in order for such a thing to come into doubt at all, we must presume the definite distinction between being and not being. Whether being is distinct from not being is not something we doubt in this case. Well, yeah, it's an inanimate object. It's self-apparent. It's either open or it's not. The word being is thus indefinite in its meaning, and nevertheless we understand it definitely. Being proves to be extremely definite and completely indefinite according to the usual logic. We have here an obvious contradiction, but something contradictory cannot be. There is no square circle, and yet there is this contradiction. Being a determinate and... Well, wait a minute. Something contradictory can be. Maybe not in the world of geometry, but you could be immoral and have money. You would, what you assume to be one way and another way, it would see contradictory, right? Like, I guess that would be kind of a pickle though, because let's say you are a softball coach, right? And your job is to train the boys to do, or the girls, whoever's playing baseball, softball, whatever, name the sport. You're teaching them and you're being trusted by the parents to teach them in an ethical manner, right? That you're not going to do anything weird to them. So if he does do something, it's almost like contradictory to the trusted position that you wanted him to have. However, that's a standard placed upon the person that would act as a contradiction. So he's not really being the full potential of his being as a coach. It's a contradiction. Indeed, in the contradiction table, that table that has the arrows, right, that point, it's true that, like, what he's listing here, there can be a square circle. With mathematics, there's no contradictions, but there are practical real world contradictions, right? There's rules of, like, if you do good, you'll get ahead. And then you're like, well, someone who wasn't good got ahead. They broke the stigma, not stigma, but our expectations. It seems like a contradiction. It depends. I bet you there's other examples, but we won't go too deep into it. Being as determinate and completely intermediate, we see if we do not deceive ourselves, and if for a moment amid all the day's hustle and bustle, we have time to see that we are standing in the midst of this contradiction. This standing of ours is more actual than just about anything else that we call actual, more actual than dogs and cats, automobiles and newspapers. The fact that being is an empty word for us suddenly takes on a completely different aspect. In the end, we become suspicious of the supposed emptiness of the world. If we meditate more closely on the world, then it finally becomes apparent that with all the blurred, blended universality of its meaning, we still mean something definite by it. This definite meaning is so definite and so unique in its own way that we must even say, being, that which pertains to every being whatsoever and thus disperses itself into what is most commonplace, is the most unique of all. So he wants us to contend that being is the most unique aspect of life overall. Yeah, you can definitely say that. Everything else besides being, each and every being, even if it is unique, can still be compared with another being. Well, yeah, obviously, you can compare anything you want. It could be a illogical comparison, apples and oranges, as they say, but you could still do it. These possibilities of comparison increase every being's determinability. Because of this, every being is multiply intermediate, but being, in contrast, can be compared to nothing else. It is only other than nothing, and here there is nothing to be compared. If being is thus what is most unique and most determinate, then the expression to be cannot remain empty either, and in truth it is never empty. We can easily convince ourselves of this by a comparison. When we perceive the expression to be, either by hearing it as a sound or seeing it in its written form, then it does present itself differently than does the sequence of sounds and letters abracadabra. The expression to be. So when we perceive the expression to be, all right, we can hear it, we can see it. It's so different in the sequence. This too is a sequence of sounds, but as we say at once, it is meaningless, even if it has some sense of magical formula. When we perceive expression, we can see it or hear it. You can also say we feel it. Even if it has some sense as a magical formula. In contrast, to be is not senseless in this way. Likewise, to be, when written and seen, is different at once from cosmoil. The written mark is also a sequence of letters. Well, nobody said that to be is not senseless. Nobody said that. This written mark is also a sequence of letters, of course, but we are unable to think anything by it. There is no such thing as an empty word. Yes, there is. Now, every word has connotations, but I can definitely say empty words. I can say an empty speech. Like, for example, political speech can be, I'm against the bad things. I want the good things for the American people. We want jobs. Our economy is booming. We're keeping everything great. We are the greatest nation. Like, you're literally saying a meaningless speech filled with platitudes. The words in and of themselves have meaning, but in the context of the speech, they have no meaning. They are empty. You're simply just saying a word sandwich, a word salad, just to hear your own tune. So I would disagree with Heidegger on that. Only one that is worn out yet remains full. The name being retains its naming power. The slogan, away from this empty word being, toward the particular beings, is not only an over-hastily but a highly questionable slogan. I've never heard that slogan. Let us reflect on all this once again by means of an example, which, however, like every example that we can adduce in the field of our question, can never clarify the entire state of affairs in all its scope, and thus remains subject to some reservations. Very interesting dude, Heidegger. Instead of the universal concept being, we will consider as an example the universal representation tree. If we are now to say and define what the essence of a tree is, we turn away from the universal representation. Why? Defining a tree's essence, if we define the essence of a tree, we turn away from its universal representation. Well, if I say all trees produce fruit, that wouldn't be true because not all trees produce fruit. Okay, if I say all trees produce leaves, well, that's not true. That's not the essence of a tree. The essence of a tree is not its leaves or its fruit, right? You could say that a tree would be by its height or its root system or a certain way in which the plant grows and matures within a period of time. The essence of a tree, right? That's what I could say. To the various species of trees, an individual example of these species, this procedure is so self-evident we are almost embarrassed to make special mention of it. However, the matter is not quite that simple. How are we supposed to discover the much invoked particular, the individual trees as such, as trees? How are we supposed to be able to even look for such things as trees? What are you talking about? You could tell me the essence of a tree in a desert, and then if I'm wandering along and I start to come to an oasis and I see a palm tree, I can say, oh, I think that's a tree. I was told about what a tree kind of looks like and how it has these weird little branches. It has the base, it has roots, it has the bark. You could definitely find the tree. Unless the representation of what a tree is in general is already lighting our way in advance. Well, yeah, if somebody's giving you the essence of the tree, it's going to give you a general diagram of what to look for in a tree. And even if you didn't name it as a tree, and you had a different word for tree, like árbol in Spanish, if you told me an árbol is this, it's this, and that, I'd be like, okay, cool. You can use a different word for the plant, but you could still find it. I'm not seeing where he's going with this example. If this universal representation tree were so completely indefinite and confused, it would give us no sure directive in our searching and finding it. It could happen that instead of trees, we took cars or rabbits as the determinate particulars. No, you cannot. No, I don't agree with that. A car and a rabbit and a tree, they're all so radically different. You couldn't mistake one for the other. No. Not if somebody gave you a general lighting of your way in advance. And if the essence of the tree, by someone explaining it to you, even with the most bare bones understanding, you'd still be able to find it and know that a living mammal, a rabbit, is not anywhere near a tree. As examples of a tree, even though it may be correct that in order to determine more precisely the essential multiplicity of the essence tree, we must go through the particular, it remains at least equally correct that the illumination of the essential multiplicity, the illumination of the essential multiplicity, somebody giving you an insight into the essential factors that are distributed to find said item in order to understand its essence. Yeah, I can do that. And of the essence takes hold and progresses only when we conceive and know more originally the universal essence tree. And this then means the essence plant, and this then means the essence living thing in life. Yes, one essence can imply another essence, right? It's attached, it overlaps. But the tree's essence can be its own and then overlap with the essence of plant in categorization. No one said it's either or, black and white, and that there isn't any overlapping. We may seek out thousands and thousands of trees, but if the self-developing knowledge of the tree as such does not light our way in advance in this enterprise, and does not clearly determine itself on the basis of itself, let's repeat that. So, the tree as such does not light our way in advance in this enterprise and does not clearly determine itself on the basis of itself and its essential ground, then all this will remain an idle enterprise in which we cannot see the tree for the trees. So you need the self-developed knowledge of the essence of trees ahead of time in your search for what could clearly determine itself on the basis of itself with its inclusive essentiality of a tree, to know what your tree is going into. Okay? Now, one could object precisely in regard to the universal meaning being, that our representing can no longer arise from it to anything higher, since it is, after all, the most universal meaning. When it comes to the concept that is most universal and highest of all, reference to what stands under is not only advisable, it is the only way out if we want to overcome the emptiness of the concept. Precisely in regard to the universal meaning of being. When it comes to the concept that is most universal and highest of all, what stands under? Under as in behind, as in attached to its being, the underlying assumptions you need to have in order to move forward in your discovery. Let's see. Heidegger, he does a lot of wordiness to get his points across, but we'll enjoy the ride nonetheless. What do you think, family? What does being